Good morning and welcome to the Poseidon STEM webinar series, part 5, entitled STEM Beyond the Classroom. My name is Aisha Spradley, the OSD Professional Coordinator for Poseidon, and I'll be the moderator for this session. I'd like now to introduce you to today's presenter, Dr. Chantel Wilson. Dr. Wilson is the first Penn State Extension's 4-H Youth Development Program State STEM Specialist. Dr. Wilson is also a first-generation college graduate with a bachelor's in biology from Hood College. Dr. Wilson also holds a Master's of Science in Plant Pathology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a PhD in Crop and Soil Environmental Sciences from Virginia Tech. Dr. Wilson's goal is to expand STEM access, inclusion, and belonging among youth in Pennsylvania, and to also address STEM hesitancy among adults and youth alike. Let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Chantel Wilson.
All right, thank you all so much for the introduction. I really appreciate that. And I'll go ahead and start sharing my slides. So again, I'm Dr. Chantel Wilson. I'm with Penn State Extension, which is part of Penn State University. And I am the current STEM specialist here for 4-H. And in my previous role, I was the state STEM specialist for Virginia for 4 years. So changed states over a little bit, but I'm really glad to be here and back home since Pennsylvania is originally home for me. But if you don't know what extension is, quite a few people don't. I'll tell you a little bit about Penn State Extension and 4-H before we dive in to the STEM component of the talk specifically. But basically, we are an extended campus designed to bring research-based knowledge to the public. We are partially federally funded through the United States Department of Agriculture, and it's partially state or institution funded, depending on where you're located in the United States. But every state does have a cooperative extension program. And most people are probably most familiar with the agriculture outreach that cooperative extension does. So it's very much been associated with being able to improve crops or help with animal systems, things like that. But we also have staff in communities and vitality, energy, horticulture. We do water quality testing. There's a whole host of programs that Extension has to offer. And one in particular is the 4-H Youth Development Program, which I am part of. And that is the K-12 informal educational outreach program that we do. And our main pillar areas for that are agriculture, but we also have civic engagement and leadership, healthy living, STEM, and agriculture, if I didn't mention that already. So before we get started, I want to know what everybody here thinks STEM is, because a lot of people have a different background and different conception of what STEM actually is. So if you'd like to unmute yourself or maybe drop a comment in the chat, maybe our moderator, if they're seeing in the chat there, can let me know what kind of things we're seeing. And there's no wrong answers. Any brave souls?
So we have science, technology, engineering, and math, science, technology, and engineering, and math again, science, low and high technology, but mostly inquiry and experimentation.
Okay. So I'm definitely seeing some of the groundwork and framework and as far as what the components of the acronym is. Anything else? Students understanding.
I'm going to unmute myself and say STEM is the way of the future, leading our young minds to a pathway to workforce development.
Absolutely. And that's one of 4-H's true north goals going forward, is very much looking at career preparation and workforce development as part of our skills for positive youth development that we're trying to instill on our young people. And I also see some career path introduction in education. All right, so those are all correct. one of the things you'll hear me say a lot is I always say that STEM is a terrible acronym for what it is. So it definitely has its roots in science, implemented by technology and supported by engineering and math, but it can encompass so many other things. And a lot of people tend to think it's just computers or electricity, physics. I'm not one of those people. So it's really one of those, I'm looking more of the educational process, and you're not really looking at those different content areas in a silo. The content is useful, but we're not overemphasizing on those content areas. And we're looking more at building those skills that would enable you to be a successful person in STEM, or even, just build some critical thinking, problem solving skills, things like that, that are the groundwork and the basis for that. So kind of my definition of STEM, integration of two or more elements with science, technology, engineering, agriculture, math, or other fields. You've probably heard of STEM H, STREAM, and all of the other letters that can get tacked on, but it's all essentially the same thing with that groundwork that was laid in science and technology. But really, the more you combine those elements for the more complete understanding, the more successful your STEM program will be. And like I said before, I'm very much a process educator. So really, I want to see those skills that will enable a young person to be successful in STEM. And one of the things I also say all the time is you don't need to be an expert at all to be able to teach STEM. I will routinely pick up something on my desk and say, hey, you can teach STEM using this thing. It's just all about asking the right questions and thinking outside of the box and thinking a little bit differently. So that STEM is everywhere. And you're probably already doing it and you don't even realize it if you're not a STEM educator. And one of the things that, you want to model is that it's okay to fail or to not have all the answers. And that's what will really help to build resiliency in youth, which is a critical STEM skill. And I can tell you as a scientist, you saw some of my background on there. I've been employed in all different ranges of science. Things go wrong a lot more than they go right. So you definitely need to be able to be comfortable with failure, but the most important part of that is learning from it. So you're having a bad day at work, you screw up in front of the kids. It's okay to say, hey, I messed up. It happens. I can either choose to give up and be like, yep, I'm going home for the day. I'm not doing this anymore. Or I can learn from it and do better next time and then model that behavior, because that's something that's so important in preparing kids for a STEM career or education. But I say it all the time, you don't need to have a STEM background to be able to do this. It's really about asking questions. Like you can pick up something around you, for example, or just look around the room and focus on something. Think of questions like, how does it work? Or why does it do that? Or how can I solve this problem? Or what's it made of and why? There's a lot of engineering that probably went into that very simple looking product that you have sitting next to you. Or even something like a stapler is technology. It's simple technology, but it is technology. So you don't always have to have, the big fancy STEM toys that a lot of our programs can't afford anyway for a lot of it to be able to teach STEM. You can use it with very simple things just by starting to ask some of those questions a little bit differently. So one of the things I always tell informal educators or facilitators is it's not your job to be the expert in STEM. Your job is to open the door and pique that youth's interest in it. They can choose to walk through that door and decide to become the expert if it's something that interests them. You as a facilitator can seek unique, engaging topics and always think about relevance in their life, because it's something that's not really relevant to them. They're not going to care about it so much. But if you can pick out things right in front of them or use some of your existing programs and start to approach it a little bit differently with some intentional STEM learning concepts, you can make a huge difference very quickly in just getting them to think differently. Again, you want to ask those questions, especially open-end ones, and give opportunities for feedback and encourage reflection. That's something we do in 4-H a lot, and I'll go through our model of experiential learning and how we do that. But also model comfort and not knowing what the answer is. And be like, I'm not sure. How can we find that answer? And then model being able to find good sources of information or asking an expert, because that's a good way of learning itself, just by approaching those people. And I don't even want to go down the rabbit hole of artificial intelligence lately with things that have been going on Google and everything, because that's not always your best source of information. And usually, I'm using those research-based knowledge sources or things like that are so much more reliable in getting you the correct answers that you need. And for example, AI is a tool, but it's not a perfect tool, and it's really not getting us there in terms of things beyond content knowledge. And also, I've almost missed an important one: to encourage collaboration and teamwork from people from diverse backgrounds. And I don't know if you've noticed this in the education landscape, especially in higher ed, but more and more graduate schools are encouraging backgrounds, or excuse me, diverse backgrounds from their applicants. Does anybody know why? So why would you want like a physics major in like, I don't know, a biology program or something like that?
It just brings a richness to, you have a different perspective. You might be familiar with different resources or different examples. It just brings more to it. Not everybody in the same mindset.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. Anybody else? But yeah, so even with PhDs, they were, trained at one point in history to be the expert on a topic. And if you're all studying the same way, all thinking the same way, you're not going to get any innovation or creativity. And that's why it's important to bring in people from outside fields or bring in people with different lived experience. My lived experience might be very different from yours. Something that I think might be a great solution, be like, that's not going to work in my community. Or with this cultural background or religious background, there's other things to consider. So it's really important to have that integrated interdisciplinary team, because they can help you ask those different questions or bring that richness that you're looking for innovation. So on my soapbox for just a second, these are some quotes that are really associated with me. But one of the things that I think is important in the out of school time space is we aren't replacing formal education. We're here supporting it. And that gives us a lot more freedom than what we would traditionally have in a classroom, especially when things are being taught to a test or remembering content knowledge. We have so much more leeway in what we can do with STEM education. And we can also address those positive youth development and life skills and focus on that social emotional learning that is so critical for STEM, because somebody in survival mode, for example, isn't going to be able to engage in higher learning, and they're not going to be able to think creatively and really do that problem solving if they're focused on having their basic needs met. And sometimes our schools can't focus on that so much, but we can as those positive youth development and out of school time educators. And the last one is, I say this all the time, STEM is for everyone and it's present everywhere. And you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to have that background in science or math. You just need the curious mind and begin to ask the right questions. And today I'm going to help you learn about some of those questions that you can ask and some of the experiential learning framework that we have to implement it. So in 4-H, our motto is learn by doing. We are very much based on experiential learning, and we go through this model that you can see here on the left. It's do, reflect, apply. So the more hands-on you can make an activity, the better, but you really want to encourage application of that. Be like, okay, you learned this here. how can you use that somewhere else? Like, okay, you really like this thing, but how does it relate to something you learned in school? And have them, apply back and be able to close that circle on being able to learn and apply it to different situations. That's something you really need as a STEM skill and is in demand for employers. And also the engineering design process, which is very similar, building on resiliency. Like I said before, something doesn't work. Okay, that happens all the time. We didn't land on the moon the first time we tried to build a rocket. It took lots of iteration, lots of practice. We learned what did and what didn't work. We developed those possible solutions, and we keep trying until we get there. And a lot of things with especially younger kids, they are driven by curiosity. They're naturally interested in STEM. They want to explore. They want to understand how things work. They want to understand how things connect. That kid that takes things apart and, you're like, oh no, that's a very curious STEM kid. They want to know how it works and they're curious about it. And a lot of times, unfortunately, in formal ed too, we tell them, sit there, don't do that, don't take things apart, or encourage that curiosity right out of them sometimes. So we again have that opportunity in the out of school time environment to bring that out of the classroom and to really engage those natural STEM skills we already have when we're younger, just to build on them intentionally. And some of the things we can do, science content is part of it, so you definitely can include science content as part of your program. But again, don't worry about being an expert on it, because really a lot of the things you want to focus more on, of course you can develop certain skills and you can develop those life skills, but they will be learning that content in their formal education in the classroom. So I say focus less on that and let's focus more on our strength outside of the classroom. Really look at those scientific reasoning skills, find those sparks, help them find things that interest them, that excite them to get out of bed or come to your out of school time program and be like, I want to do this because I'm excited to learn more. And one of those things you can do, especially older kids, is contribution through applied participation. So if you've heard of things like citizen science or participatory science, like things like the Great Backyard Bird Count, NASA has a whole bunch of them, but you as a common citizen or youth can make a difference and bring things to the scientific community just by helping analyze data. And you're actually furthering science and making a difference in sometimes very small things, like being able to, there's one I saw this morning for Soundburst on NASA to see if you can hear pulses out there in the universe because they're looking for certain types of stars. It's totally cool stuff. And, you're contributing to that. And you don't even have to be a scientist to do it. So one of the things I'd like everybody to do, and I can drop this in the chat if you didn't get it directly beforehand, I want you to take a look at this 4-H activity that was developed. I'm going to pick on some of my friends a little bit in Virginia. This was a activity that was developed for a camp. But I want you to take a look at it and kind of think about some of the things I talked about in the previous slides. Think about what makes this activity STEM, and does it include the experiential learning process or engineering design? Does it have those 4 anchor points of scientific literacy I mentioned? Or kind of what improvements would you suggest for this activity guide? So go ahead and take 5 minutes, read through it, and just tell me what you think as an educator. And if we want to put folks in breakout rooms, we can go ahead and do that so you all can share with each other and come back in 5 minutes. All right, it looks like we're getting our folks back. Is everyone still seeing the slides on the screen? Just double checking. Okay. So if anybody wants to be a representative for their group and kind of let me know what you were talking about, and we can answer a couple of these questions. What do you think made that activity STEM? We'll start there. And you can also type in the chat. Any ideas? I see some creative problem solving in the chat. Yep. Did it include the elements of the experiential learning or the engineering design process? That slide we went through a slider back. I see some nodding. Yes. Were you able to point out any of those anchor points of scientific literacy? Or which ones of those stood out to you? The collaborating process of testing and reevaluating, learning through making mistakes. Yep. Contribution through participation. So you could certainly engineer a solution and apply that to other things. So most importantly, I want to point out, what do you think was missing from this guide as an educator when you're looking at this? Any ideas? I'm seeing real life application. So study of all the structures, so maybe some background information was missing. I know that would be intimidating to me if I wasn't sure what I was doing coming in. If I'm not a STEM educator, I'd want that background. Peer review, I didn't see any references. Is it research-based? Yes. Looking at everyone else's structures to see many successful ways, or how could you build on that? Team review. Yeah, so you all are very much pulling out some things that could have made this a better STEM activity, especially, improving that engineering design process. We're showing that, many ideas can work, and then you could take it and, okay, mine didn't work so well for this, but they did something really good over here. So let's pull that and try this with our original idea and see how it works. That's really getting it to the root of STEM and that creative problem solving. And see, we talked about our experiences doing this with different groups and how it had worked with various audiences. Yep, so it could mean like different things for different people as well. And one of the things I'm going to harp on is what happened at the end. What did the students learn? Did they get any kind of recap on why they did this activity? Yeah, no opportunity for reflection. So to me, that is the biggest glaring missing thing from this activity. And it had some objectives on there, but do you think those matched really well with the reflection and the outcome of the activity? Yeah, I see some people shaking their heads. So this was a good start, but and like many programs, we can have a good start, but really thinking intentionally about your lesson itself, the outcomes you want, really start with the end in mind. Like think about, what do I want the kids to learn from this? And then work backwards and write your program from there and see if you are really hitting those points that you wanted to make. Like, did you want to cover the science content? Did you want them to learn the engineering design process? Do they really know what it understand what it means to be an engineer? So that's part of what I get into in the next part of this talk is lesson planning. I bet some of you are like getting ready to go into fits, especially if you were in formal ed before and then went into out of school time learning, because I know this isn't really everybody's favorite in doing that. And I'm dropping a tool in here in the chat box if anybody would like to ever use this to kind of evaluate your learning outcomes. But even for activities or informal ed, you definitely want to think about the outcomes. And so you can direct that activity appropriately and guide those kids through the right questions. So begin with the end in mind. So get my slide going here. You want to begin the learning experience planning with the end in mind. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Bloom's taxonomy. This is definitely getting more into the formal educational space, but your outcomes and the questions you ask the youth can target different levels of their cognition. So at the lower levels, we're just asking them to remember things or just to parrot back some knowledge on that. But whenever you're starting to get into those STEM skills, you really want to build those skills and really want to think about how things are integrating together, that's when you get in level 4, 5, and 6. So analyzing things, creating things, evaluating, and making judgment. So even if you start your activity with an outcome and just put it on a post-it note or two just to keep you track while you're running an activity. I know that can be easier said than done with like 26 kids running around, but it does help, especially if you have a couple of those questions on there that you can be like, okay, I really need to remember to do this, or I really need to remember to take 5 minutes at the end of my activity and give the kids the why. Why do we do this? Why is it important? How is it relevant to other things, or maybe some things you learned at school? So I'm going to go really quickly through these, but these are the levels of Bloom's taxonomy. And going back through to my reference here, you can find more about this. It's Teaching at Its Best, a book. It's targeted towards higher ed, but there's definitely some formal learning principles in there that might help you write better learning objectives in the taxonomy of cognitive outcomes, which was originally written by Bloom and then revised by Anderson and Krethel. But basically, those lower levels of questions, if you're writing a learning objective or something you want to cover, and you're using verbs like choose or define or label or name or list, you're really asking them to remember something. The ability to remember and reproduce previously learned material. So that's what I was saying when you're getting them to parrot back. So that's not really stimulating higher learning. You're focusing more on content here, and just so they can know what the content was, but they aren't necessarily applying it anyway. And an objective might be like define parasitism or state Newton's laws of motion, those kind of things. Starting to move up the ladder, the next one is comprehension and understanding. So my example here is 1 + 1 = 2. The ability to grasp the meaning of material and restate it in one's own words. And those verbs there that I have in the box are the ones that are usually associated with that. You're asking them to arrange something, or interpret, or explain, or summarize, like to describe the trends of the graph in their own words, or summarize something that they read, or translate a code into instructions. The next is application and applying. So the ability to use learned material in new and concrete situations. So you're asking them to apply, you're asking them to calculate, you're asking them to determine, and this is where we're starting to get into the good stuff on the experiential learning cycle, because they're doing at this point. So to calculate something, to use an experiment to find out the influence of light and light quality on photosynthesis, or to give examples that they can draw from other places. Making them get even more into STEM skills here with analysis and analyzing. So this is the ability to break down the material into its components to understand organizational structure. So I have an engine here, but if you took that apart and saw those different pieces, would you really understand how they work together and are integrated to make that engine work? So whenever you ask questions that ask them to classify or experiment or dissect or contrast, that's when you're really getting them into analysis, a very critical STEM skill. Synthesis and creating is the next one. You put those pieces of material together to form a new whole. You ask them to build, to predict, to organize, to estimate, to plan, to make that wind turbine or build that engineering design challenge tower using spaghetti and marshmallows, or to have them do participatory science, or even teach others in their community, to organize a workshop to teach others about water conservation, or even designing a bluebird house. Like, what would you need to know about bluebirds to make a house? And there's actually certain things you would need to know, like they prefer a very certain size hole in their nesting box, and it's got to face a certain direction for a bluebird to actually want to use that nest or be able to use it. And then the last one is evaluating an evaluation, the ability to judge the value of a material for a given purpose. So this is assessing or defending, making a judgment, making a recommendation based on things they know. So recommending a treatment option, you use little stuffed animals and show them different levels of an animal being sick, or you just use it as a model and say, which one do you think you might need to treat based on the symptoms they're seeing, and really have them make a judgment call on there. And that's when you're moving up that ladder of targeting STEM skills. And to do this in conjunction with those learning outcomes that you're writing, effective questioning is really another critical one. And again, I can drop into the chat box a tool for you to use. This is examples of questions from each level of that Bloom's taxonomy, so you know if you're targeting and just getting them to remember stuff, or if you're really getting down into the weeds in those STEM skills. And you don't have to do all those levels of Bloom at once, but you can build your learning experiences to get them there to think critically and to problem solve. So effective questions, what and how you ask really does matter. So you establish those learning outcomes to develop the questions. You want to move up that level of cognitive questioning. So start at the bottom if they don't really know much about it at all, and then build on that as their abilities and skills increase. And this is also an opportunity for youth to practice their communication skills whenever you're asking them questions directly or having them discuss with members in their group, just like I had you do whenever you were looking at the marshmallow activity just now. That's an opportunity for them to practice their communication skills and for people to see things different ways and to hear each other. So you can start with the factual recall, those parroting, gradually increase the complexity of the questions. If they comprehend, then you can move on to application. If they apply, you can move to analysis. But one of the things that I really encourage STEM educators to do, youth are so quick to judge without a thorough understanding of their ideas. And whenever you can give them opportunities to respectfully challenge each other and build that as a skill, be like, why do you think this? Or I don't agree because of this. Or give them the opportunity to do that with you. That's really important because a lot of times they're thinking in black and white. They're not seeing the nuance in the gray area that is so much part of STEM because there's so many variables and the way things interconnect. But questions are really critical during that reflection period of experiential learning. And I always say, I would rather you do less in your experiential learning experience or do less in your program if it means that you have time to do the reflection, because that's where the learning happens. That's where you're getting the why. That's where they're making the connections and pulling things from other areas that they truly know. Again, going to go through these very quickly. Types of good reflection questions. Ones that encourage them to use their logic by comparing and contrasting things. Ones that force them to evaluate so they can make good decisions or problem solve so that they know that they can learn and do better next time based on a failure if they evaluate the experience they just have. So your tower didn't work. Why do you think it didn't work? What would you do better next time? And then give them that next time. Give them the opportunity to build it again and use what they learned from others so they can apply that. Critical questions, ones that challenge the validity, arguments, claims, interpretations, sources. That's so important, especially, like I said, in the age of AI, when it can be confusing to know which sources are valid or not. And you really want to decrease that all or nothing surface level thinking and encourage them to think deeper about things, to seek out expertise, and to consider the relevance of what they're hearing. Questions that have cause and effect or connect are very good. Have them link facts, relationships, and concepts. Ask them about their personal connection and experiences, because sometimes their answers might surprise you. They might be able to relate what they learned to something you might not have ever thought about because you'd never experienced it. Requesting more evidence, like if they're getting into that black or white thinking, well, did you think about this? Or how do you know? Are really important ones to start building them towards this critical thinking skills. Clarification and open-ended. You want to try to avoid yes or no questions as much as possible. Give them room to explain their thought process and rationale. And this also builds your rapport with them as an educator because they're feeling heard and they have an opportunity to explain why they're thinking certain ways. And it invites healthy risk taking, safe opportunities to fail. When you can build that into your programs, that's really critical. Like it's probably not going to work the first time around, but we're going to see how we can make it better in the next steps. Linking and extension questions, again, to build relevance, and then summary and synthesis. Have them review and reflect on important ideas shared, the highlights, and provide an opportunity to solidify the learning experience by a recap of concepts learned, exploring feelings. Okay, so I know that was a lot for the formal ed space. I do want to pause here just for a second to see if anybody has any questions before we can get into some more of the fun stuff and you can see where STEM really is in some of the everyday learning. Does anybody have any questions? I know that was heavy pedagogy. Okay, well then we will move on. In this part of the talk, I'm really going to be talking about making those connections in everyday life. And one of the things I'm just going to pull out because it's one of our programs that we offer in extension for 4-H in certain local counties is our shooting sports program and focus on archery. And really, you can integrate STEM into any lesson or activity that you have. It's like I said, just thinking about it a little differently. Think creatively how those topics relate. For example, like how is archery related to STEM? Anybody have any ideas? Want to throw in the chat? What would make an archery program or teaching a kid how to shoot a bow and arrow? Why would that be STEM? Physics. That's a very good one. Material science. Yep. What the arrows are made of matter. Geometry, trigonometry, absolutely. Seen physics more. So yeah, there's definitely some scientific content areas that can be explored. And there were jobs for people to design and engineer these things. Like why would a certain wood be used, for example? Or yes, eye and hand coordination, or even accessibility. Does anybody know what happens when a lot of archer hunters can't pull back the bow and arrow anymore? What they usually do to still be able to hunt with a bow and arrow, but they don't have to physically pull it back, so it's an accommodation. Yes, crossbow. I saw it. So that took an engineer to figure that out, right? And that's science. Someone's saying wind resistance coordination, understanding how their bodies work. Yes, 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 all good stuff. Those are all good STEM thinking questions that you can ask the youth about. And guess what? You don't have to have the answer exactly of how it works, but you can guide them to how to find it, right? It was just being able to ask those questions and see where that relevance was. But yes, again, why does it do that? What happens when I do this? You know, provide them the opportunities to find those answers. Don't tell them right away. And then encourage the use of experts for reliable research-based resources. And just to toot our own horn, Penn State Extension's one. We're a college-based resource, and we do have science-based knowledge in all of our programs. So we can definitely help you find some of those or connect you with faculty if you wanted to dive deeper on some of those things. But I am going to play this video. We won't do the same thing. And I'll also drop in the chat if you want to read it on your own time. It's the physics behind wobbling bow and arrows, but take notes of how you're feeling whenever you're watching this video. Really think about that and maybe some things that interested you and maybe how you could use this in a program. For example, if you were going to do a bow and arrow or archery at camp.
Hey, it's me, Destin, and welcome back to Smarter Every Day. So in one of the last episodes, I introduced you to a legend with a longbow. He's from my hometown, and his name is Byron Ferguson. He shot an aspirin out of the air in slow motion. But there's something that happened in the arrow I didn't understand. It was deflecting, and this has something to do with what's called the archer's paradox. What do you think, Byron?
Archer's paradox is the demon for all archers. There are ways to work around it.
Not bad. All right, so today on Smarter Every Day, we're going to understand how an arrow deflects and what's called the archer's paradox. A paradox is a situation involving two things with a contradictory nature. So what is the archer's paradox? What are the two things that an archer has to deconflict? My friend John explained it to me like this. Let's pretend that this pecan tree is the bow, and this is the line of our bowstring. If we take an arrow and we put it into our bow and we draw the bow back, and we're trying to hit that target over there, watch what happens. As we release the bowstring and it travels closer to the bow, look at that. The fact that the bow is sitting here in our way between us and the target causes the arrow to point off in a different direction. So how can we possibly hit that target when our arrow is pointed over there? This is the archer's paradox, because we know they actually do hit targets like that. Toy designers are cheaters. They don't deal with the paradox, they just get around it. For example, the guy who designed this suction cup bow, he doesn't go around the handle, straight through the middle. Check that out. Whoever designed this crossbow, instead of being in line with the bow itself, the string is offset by this big rail. That way the string is always pushing along the dart. So how does a longbow shooter get around this problem? Here's how. They don't have a completely rigid arrow like that. They have a bendable arrow like this. See, when it vibrates, you can see these nodal points? That's important. Check this out. As we put this real arrow into the bow here, and we shoot, as we go towards the bow, the fact that we're accelerating this arrow causes it to build up strain energy, causing this big curvature. That curvature then snaps back in the other direction once it bends to a certain point, and look what we have. We have the arrow bending around the bow. When we release, it does something cool. It snakes around the bow just like this, and you're able to fly all the way to the target. So the archer's paradox is the fact that you have a bow in between you and the target, and you're still able to get around the bow.
The first thing that happens is the arrow bends from the pressure of the string and the front of the arrow being against the riser of the bow. As it leaves the bow, and it's already clear of the bow, it bends in the opposite direction. Where those two cross determines where the arrow will fly. 100% of the time, the arrow will fly to where these 2 points are crossed or pointed. In other words, if this one had been here, then the arrow's going to fly off to the left. If it was here, the arrow will fly off to the right. We want those two lined up to go straight to the target.
Gotcha. So the fact that it bends helps it get around the arrow rest without going off at an angle, as if it were a straight line.
Correct.
You're pushing the string straight towards the handle, but somehow it makes it around the handle.
Right.
And the bends are how it does that.
That's correct.
All right, my buddy Xander actually shoots with a compound bow. You don't do any of that longbow stuff, right?
I have one, but I'm not really good at it.
All right, so what's the deal here?
So compound, there's a whole lot more going on in compound because there's more things that can go wrong too. But there are several advantages if they're working.
Yeah.
So the compound, you see that it's cut out in the middle. You got this.
Oh, so the riser's notched out is what you're saying?
Yeah, so the arrow is traveling straight. It doesn't have to go around a riser.
Okay.
And many people shoot also a drop away rest. You see the arrows kind of drop down. Whenever you pull the bow back, a string attached to one of the bow strings pulls the rest up.
Nice.
Centers your arrow. If you have it all lined up, square, your arrow's nice and level. And then when you shoot, that arrow will drop, the rest will drop away.
Well, shoot it. Shoot it. Let's do it. Hold on, wait. Let me zoom in.
All right.
So I'm looking at that rest. It's going to fall away, right?
That's real fast.
Okay, I'm ready. Dude, that is super fast. So is the arrow touching the rest as it goes through
A little bit.
Really?
Because it drops, but it's not, immediate. It's down before the full arrow passes it.
So the goal here is you don't have to bend around the riser, but I bet the arrow still bends, though.
It does bend, and that's actually important in the straightness of the arrow flight.
Isn't that
I'm going to stop it there. So how are you all feeling? Like whenever you first started watching that video, did anything grab your attention? That was cool, right? He shot an aspirin, this tiny little thing, out of midair.
Yes, that was cool.
Yeah, and if you go in and watch that video farther, you can actually see that the trick is that all of his arrows are tested so they're the same stiffness. So he knows exactly how it's going to move based on the material that the bow is made of. And he uses a little meter to actually determine the stiffness of the arrow. So that was a spark, right? That got your interest. Same thing. with younger
What else
kids.
caught
They'll
my
see that, think that's
attention?
cool.
What
So
else
go
caught
ahead.
my attention was that he compared the longbow to the other bow and arrow, and how he showed like the differences in them. And I think that would catch our students' attention as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So there was a trick shot there, and that evoked a certain emotional response that was like, oh, wow. And if you can do that, if you can get the wow, a lot of times you'll get that spark and they want to ask more. They want to know more. Oh, this is pretty neat. Let's investigate it farther. And you don't need to know all the answers, but you can help them find them for sure. And some of the outcomes you could write with this, like if you wanted them to be able to consistently hit a target, like if you were actually having them physically shoot in a shooting sports program, that could be one of them. But you could also take an engineering design challenge and maybe not show them the part with the cheater crossbow that they had for the kids that's going right through the middle of the bow and arrow, but have them design one that wouldn't be affected by the archer's paradox and see what they come up with. Or see if you can get them to describe the differences between the different types of archery equipment. But from the very lowest level of blooms, you would ask them, what's a paradox? As you move up and get into those STEM questions, how are a longbow, compound bow, and a crossbow alike? How are they different? How would you design a bow and arrow that's not affected by the archer's paradox? Or what's the most important variable to control for when shooting an arrow from a longbow, and why? And I gave you a hint with that. It was the material science of the stiffness of the arrow. So potential activities you could use with this. You could do a digital spine tester to measure the arrow and locate the spine. So that was the stiffness of the arrow. Something that's very important in STEM is teaching the difference between accuracy and precision. If you're both accurate and precise, you're consistently hitting the same target in the same area in the same location that you want it to. If you're inaccurate, you're not hitting the target in the center, but you're precise, you're still keeping that grouping. It's still hitting the same arts or same area of the target, but it's not where you want it to. Or accurate and imprecise. Can anybody think why this might be important to teach the difference between accuracy and precision? Think your doctor's office. So if they measure something on you, or you take your thermometer, you want it to have both the right reading and you want it to be right every time, right? But if you have one that's not calibrated correctly, you might see that, okay, I don't have a fever, and you might get that measurement over and over again. But when in actuality, you really do. So it's important to design instruments that are both accurate and precise. So one more quick breakout. We're going to take, we'll say 4 minutes for this one, and then we'll come back and do a quick reflection. I will drop this camp class and description in the chat if you choose to use it, but I want you to think about and talk in your groups. Discuss how STEM can be integrated in 2 of the classes or even your own program. Just think about what you're already doing and how you could start to make it more STEMified by maybe writing an objective or 2. For one class, write one desired STEM outcome. What do you want them to be able to do? And then think about 6 questions for one from each level of Bloom's hierarchy. And you can use any available resource, but we'll go ahead and do a breakout and come back at the last minute to discuss among yourselves. All right, looks like we got everybody back. Does anybody want to share? We'll just take 1 or 2 about how you think you might be able to address STEM in one of your programs and maybe some objectives you'll have going forward. 1 or 2?
I can address like the low level question. This year they learned about watersheds and precipitation. So I said, like, what is a watershed? And then I had them do like after we had a presenter come in and show them about watershed, they did like a project on it where they had to explain, what they learned from the presentation and then do like a working model. But they were able to start off at low level, then go to mid, and then started thinking on the higher level.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the cool things you could do with watershed education, and one of the programs we have with Penn State Extension are the Master Watershed Stewards, who are a group of volunteers. And a lot of them are participating in participatory science or citizen science. So even just like monitoring your watershed, the students could do that, contribution through applied science as well. So that's great. That's fantastic. Anybody else? I know we're running a little over time, but we'll take one more if anybody wants to share. Okay, well, would be remiss if I didn't follow my own rules and do a quick debrief. Does anybody want to drop in the chat or let me know one of these questions? Like, what are some of the things you learned today? Or how confident did you feel teaching STEM before coming to this training versus afterward? Like, what changed and why? Or how can you apply what you've learned to your programs? Or how can you build or model resilience? Anybody have any ideas for those? Or we can even just do a quick show of hands. How many of you feel better about teaching STEM now that you've got maybe a different idea of what it is? Yay, I see at least a couple. That's what we're looking for. Yeah, woohoo! All right. So I see somebody who wants to explore the Smarter Everyday episodes. Yep, yep. But yeah, I just encourage you to go back and really use that rubric and some of those question examples, take it back to your programs, and really think about what you can do to STEMify it a little more and maybe ask some of those better questions. But if you want to get involved too with Penn State Extension, you can always contact me, especially if you're interested in the 4-H programs. And I have the URL down there, but you can search Pennsylvania 4-H. We do have opportunities. If you have a spark, something you're passionate about in STEM and you want to teach it to kids, we definitely will recruit volunteers and we offer professional development, chances to travel and materials to things for you to be able to work with the youth in their passion areas. But other than that, thank you. And I know some of you will probably have to go because we're a little bit over time, but I'd be happy to entertain any questions you might have too. And also extensions programs are open to all. So we will serve anyone.
All right, that concludes our session for today. We hope you enjoyed the presentation. I'd like to thank Dr. Wilson for taking the time to share this information with us. And as stated before, please take a second to fill out the evaluation survey in the chat box. And the next session will be June 19th, and it will be preparing for STEM careers.